In the quiet town of Black Hollow, nestled between dark woods and rolling hills, there stood an old house that had seen better days. The last rays of sunlight were fading, casting long shadows across the cobblestone path that led to its crooked front door. This was no ordinary house. It belonged to Martha and her young son, Leo, who had moved in just a month prior. The townspeople often whispered about the house, claiming it was cursed, but Martha dismissed their chatter, laughing it off as mere superstition. After all, she had always believed that people liked to talk, especially about things they didn't understand. However, that evening, as they settled into their new home, a strange vibration rippled through the walls, like a low sound thrumming under the wood. It was as if the house had a heartbeat of its own, stirring and waking from a long slumber. Martha brushed it off, convincing herself it was only the house settling into its new occupants. But deep down, a tiny voice of worry niggled at her thoughts, urging her to keep her eyes open. That night, while Leo slept soundly in his room, wrapped up in a superhero blanket, Martha wandered through the dimly lit hallways of the old house. The atmosphere felt thick, almost as if the shadows were alive. She touched the walls with her fingers, feeling the coolness of the aged wood beneath her fingertips. Rubbing her hand along a rough patch, she suddenly felt a chill, a sensation that seemed to seep into her bones. As she turned the corner into the living room, she noticed a small crack forming on the wall. At first, it seemed innocuous, just a minor blemish on the house's surface. Yet, when she leaned closer, her eyes widened. She thought she could see something shifting behind it, a faint shadow moving back and forth. A shiver trickled down her spine, like ice coursing through her veins. She stepped back, almost bumping into the fireplace, its bricks cold and hard against her back. Ignoring her unease and hoping to shake off the chill, she turned on the television in the living room, hoping to drown her worries in the glow of the screen. Colorful lights flickered and danced across the walls, illuminating the old family photos that hung crookedly in their frames. But the crack continued to gnaw at her thoughts, its foreboding presence growing larger than the reality of the mundane life she was trying to rebuild. She glanced at the clock. It was late, much later than she realized. Perhaps she was just overtired and the shadows were playing tricks on her mind. Yet, as she settled into the worn-out couch, the soft murmurs began. Whispers floated through the air, soft yet unsettling, filling the room with a strange energy that felt both luring and threatening at the same time. The more she listened, the more those whispers grew in intensity, wrapping around her thoughts like a sinister mist. The next morning, with the sun spilling its warm golden light through the thin curtains, Martha found herself pacing the living room, jumping at every creak and groan of the old structure. She tried to shake off her unease, focusing instead on unpacking boxes and putting the house in order. But each box she opened only seemed to heighten her anxiety, as if the very items inside were tainted with the house's secrets. Leo bounded down the stairs, his youthful energy a stark contrast to her heavy heart. "Mommy, look," Leo exclaimed, pointing excitedly at the crack in the wall, his eyes wide with fascination. "What's that? Something is behind there." His innocent curiosity sent a jolt of fear coursing through her. It reminded her of the night before, the whispers that echoed in her ears. "It's just an old house, sweetheart," Martha replied, her voice faltering slightly. But even as she said the words, she felt the cracks creeping along the walls. They had grown overnight, jagged and menacing, twisting like malevolent vines. Their dark shapes seemed to reach out for her, and she swallowed hard, trying to ignore the cloying anxiety settling in her gut. But the whispers returned, louder now, a cacophony of voices echoing from within the walls, wrapping around her like a cool fog. Determined to protect Leo, she decided to call the handyman, Mr. Grady, who lived just a few houses down. He was a gruff old man, always seen with a tool belt slung low on his hips, yet he had a soft heart and always loved to help those in need. Martha shared her concerns with him, pointing toward the expanding fissures in the wall. Mr. Grady examined the cracks closely, squinting as he leaned in for a better view. His brow furrowed in concentration, and he shook his head slowly as if trying to comprehend the mystery at hand. "These are peculiar," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "Old houses settle like this sometimes. But these, they don't look right." His eyes darted to the crack before quickly shifting back to Martha, making her skin crawl with an uncomfortable sensation. As he worked, the whispers grew more insistent, swelling around her like an orchestra of unsettling sounds demanding her attention. She soon realized she could almost make out words, a sorrowful mix of pleading voices drifting like smoke through the air around her. When Leo asked curiously what was happening, the sound wrapped around him, vibrating through the room, and even he tilted his head, listening with a mix of innocent wonder and growing concern. "What do you think it is?" she finally dared to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Grady hesitated, tossing his tools down on the floor with a clatter that sent tiny echoes through the room. The silence that followed felt heavy, almost as if it had mass, filling every corner. "I don't know, Martha. Sometimes houses keep things inside them, things hidden for a long time." His words felt like a cold gust of wind, making the hair on her arms stand on end. With an unsteady hand, he started packing up his tools, leaving the cracks gaping wide, their angry edges almost pulsating. Just before he left, he glanced back at her, a shadow of fear crossing his face, further cementing her worry. The unsettling silence that filled the room was punctuated only by the hollow sounds coming from the walls as he retreated. As the front door creaked closed behind him, Martha faced the expanding cracks, the chilling whispers now a relentless tide of sound. That night, as darkness enveloped the house once more, the sounds grew louder, echoing through the hollow spaces of their home. Leo whined in his sleep, stirring restlessly as the whispering grew more distinct, intertwined with the faint thumping that seemed to echo within the walls. She listened intently, her heart racing, a confused mix of fear and an odd sense of curiosity filled her chest. The whispers called out, chanting her name in tones both alluring and horrifying. They seemed to pull at her, urging her to come closer, to listen more intently. "Martha, come find us," came a voice, soft and mournful, sending icy fingers crawling across her skin. In that moment, she knew something was fundamentally wrong. Something was alive and waiting just beyond the cracks in the wall. The air turned heavy with dread as if the very essence of darkness pressed down on her shoulders, wrapping around her like a suffocating blanket. Despite the instinct that urged her to flee, she forced herself to move toward the wall, the place where the crack had widened. With hesitant steps, she placed her palm against it, feeling an unsettling warmth seep through her hand, contrasting sharply with the cold sweat beneath the surface. The whispers swirled around her, a tempest of emotions crash-landing against her. There was sadness, fear, anger, and yearning, all melded into a haunting melody that filled her senses. Clenching her teeth, she focused on the feelings rising up in her, a blend of fear but also an undeniable, magnetic pull toward the mystery. "Mama, are you okay?" Leo's sweet voice rang out from down the hallway, breaking the spell around her. It jolted her back to reality. She turned, forcing a smile onto her face, trying to shake off the lingering shadows that clouded her thoughts. "I'm fine, darling," she called back, her heart still racing but determined not to let her fear seep into her words. She took a deep breath, collecting herself. "Just a little tired, that's all." But even as she spoke, the whispers returned, encircling her once more, adamant and strong, brushing against her ears. She could still feel the warmth radiating from the crack, still hear the mournful calls begging her to listen. Her heart thudded erratically, and deep within her, a whisper, a gentle, persistent thought, begged her for understanding. Perhaps the house was not just a structure of wood and nails, perhaps it held stories buried deep within its walls, stories yearning to be told. As the hours crept by, she could not escape the feeling that an adventure awaited her in the darkness. Would she take the plunge and seek out the truth behind the whispers? Or would she descend into the depths of fear and escape the haunting sirens calling her name? Each moment held the possibility of discovery, a treasure hidden beneath layers of time, and she felt the pull growing stronger, urging her deeper into the enigma of her new home. The house around her seemed to breathe, as if it, too, longed for connection. And as she finally succumbed to the allure of the shadows that danced in her mind, Martha steeled herself for the mysteries that lay ahead, ready to unravel the secrets encased within the restless walls of Black Hollow. The true adventure was only beginning. Over the following days, the cracks continued to grow, weaving their jagged paths across the walls, like crooked fingers clawing for freedom. Each night, the darkness crept closer, and new whispers scattered through the house, weaving tales of despair and dread. Martha's dreams were no longer peaceful. They transformed into chilling nightmares filled with grotesque silhouettes lurking just beyond her reach, skittering through her mind like shadows. They twisted and turned, taunting her, making her wake in a panic. Leo's laughter, once a sound that warmed her heart, now echoed eerily within the walls, mixing with the scratching sounds that grew louder by the day. The sunny smiles of the townsfolk faded from Martha's memory, their cheerful faces replaced by the unsettling shadows that loomed in every corner of her home. She tried to think about the warm days spent at the park or the joyous times at the bakery, where the sweet smell of pastries hung thick in the air, but those thoughts flitted away like leaves in the autumn wind. All she could focus on were the cracks. They were like dark snakes winding their way through her house, twisting and turning, waiting for something to happen. As time passed, Martha began to avoid looking at the cracks altogether, but she couldn't escape how they haunted her. Each passing moment filled her with a yearning pull toward them, an unholy attraction. It was as if the cracks knew her fears and beckoned her closer while simultaneously filling her with dread. To stand before them felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, where one wrong move could send her spiraling into darkness. Whenever Leo rushed down the stairs with his innocent giggles, he would dart towards the jagged formations in the walls, his small fingers reaching out as if trying to play with an invisible friend. Martha knew better. She could see them now, the silhouettes moving beyond the cracks, grotesque and malformed, their shapes swirling together like smoke. They looked hungry, as if whatever lay within were ravenous to break free. The shadows loomed larger in her mind, filling every crevice with a sense of impending doom. Panic crested in her throat whenever Leo's laughter echoed through the narrow hallways, mixed with the scratching sounds that seemed to reply, mocking their joy. One evening, beneath the dim glow of a flickering lamp, Martha decided she could no longer wait. She felt it in her bones, the urge to confront whatever malevolent force crept within her walls. Gathering all her courage, she approached the living room. It was the same room that had once been filled with laughter and love, the room where they had spent countless evenings reading stories, sharing meals, and making memories. But now, the once comforting space felt like a prison draped in shadows. There, on the wall, the largest crack festered like a gaping wound, throbbing with a life of its own. Martha steadied her breath, pressing her ear against the cold surface. What she heard filled her with dread. It was a symphony of lamentations, a chorus of voices that spoke of anguish and sorrow. They pleaded with desperation, begging for release from the confines of the house, yearning to be free. "Let us out," they murmured, their voices echoing inside her head. Each word sent chills racing down her spine, and her heart thumped violently in her chest, like a drum signaling danger. Martha recoiled, shaken by the palpable despair that filled the air, nearly stumbling back. Yet, despite her fright, a part of her felt a deep sense of empathy, as though something trapped within the shadows was reaching out, begging for help. An unsettling urge surged within her to answer their call, even as a dark voice deep down warned her not to relent. The feeling twisted inside her, pulling at her heartstrings. She was torn between fear and compassion, unsure of what to do. She needed help. Grabbing her phone, she hesitated, pondering who might truly understand. Mr. Grady came to mind. He was kind and wise, and he would know how to handle something so strange. But Leo's cheerful voice broke through her thoughts. "Mommy, I heard them too," he exclaimed, bursting into the room, clutching a tattered stuffed bear, his constant companion. His eyes were wide with both fear and fascination, almost shining in the dim light like lanterns in a storm. "They said they want to play." Panic bubbled up in Martha's throat, and she shouted, "No, Leo, no. You must stay away from there." But even as she yelled, the words fell from her lips with little conviction. She didn't truly believe them, because Leo simply grinned, his innocent spirit shining through the darkened corridors of the house. Ignoring his mother's frantic warnings, he edged closer to the crack, curiosity dancing in his large eyes. "They're my friends," he announced gleefully. "Leo, please," she begged, desperate to pull him back into safety. The warmth of her love threatened to be swallowed by the icy grip of the shadows. But it was too late. Suddenly, the wall vibrated violently, sending a tremor through the house that knocked Martha off her feet. Her heart raced wildly as the crack widened, jagged edges splintering further, creating a widening chasm that began to change the atmosphere around them. In that instant, something massive shifted behind the wall, an ominous movement sending a slithering wave of terror coursing through Martha's veins. "Leo, come away from there," she screamed, hoping to evoke a flicker of sense in him, but her voice echoed weakly against the oppressive whispers, drawing him closer, coaxing him with promises that felt warm and inviting. The walls began to bleed darkness, a pulsating void that threatened to swallow them whole, an abyss so deep that hope seemed to vanish along with the light. Tears streamed down Martha's face, blurring her vision. She lunged forward, reaching for Leo with everything in her. "I'll get you, Leo," she cried, but her hand found only cold air as he was entranced, eyes glued to the depths beyond the widening crack. The whispers wrapped around him like a thick blanket, beckoning him closer with sweet, sinister promises. Martha reached out again, panic filling her chest, making it hard to breathe. "Leo, please, you have to come back." Then, it happened. With a sudden jolt, the crack burst open like a mouth devouring its prey. Shadows spilled forth, grotesque figures contorting and twisting as they emerged from the depths behind the wall, their forms unholy and terrible. They seized Leo, wrapping their jagged limbs around him, pulling him into the darkness. "Mommy, help," he cried, his voice a mixture of terror and longing, echoing like a chilling melody in the suffocating night. Martha's heart shattered into a million pieces as she lunged forward, desperation fueling her frantic movements. She grasped Leo's arm, her fingers curling tightly around him, but the shadows were insatiable. Their hold was strong, unyielding. "I will not let you take him," she screamed into the abyss. But her words slipped away, lost in the gaping mouth of despair. The whispers filled her mind, a demonic chorus of laughter mixed with Leo's cries, as more cracks erupted around the room, spilling forth an unholy tide of shadows that threatened to engulf her whole. The crackling sounds echoed, mingling with the panicked heartbeat of her own fear, forming a symphony of terror that enveloped everything she loved. With all her strength, she pulled Leo, determined not to let go. "We will fight this," she declared, digging her heels into the floor, feeling the vibrations of the shifting shadows under her feet. But as the dark tendrils closed in, she realized this was no ordinary struggle. It was an ancient battle between light and darkness. The shadows hissed and whispered, their words laced with malice. "Join us, little one. Why stay with her when you can be with us?" They coiled tighter around Leo, who looked both terrified and mesmerized by their promises. Martha felt her own heart wavering. Perhaps the flesh-hungry voices were right. Perhaps there was something in the shadow that called to him, something she couldn't understand. Though doubt filled her being, Martha tightened her grip on Leo's arm. She knew she couldn't let him slip away. A fierce love blossomed in her chest, a bright light pushing back against the darkness. "No, we are family. Leave him alone," she yelled, her voice growing louder, braver than before. And just like that, a flicker of light ignited in her heart, an unwavering spark of hope. With every ounce of love she could summon, she pulled Leo away from the grasp of the shadows. They were a family. And families stand together, even in the darkest of times. In the blink of an eye, the shadows writhed back, recoiling from Martha's resolute strength. "This is our home. If you want him, you must pass through me," she roared, her body wrapping around Leo like a shield, every inch of her radiating the fierce light born of love and courage. The shadows hissed angrily, retreating like smoke in the wind, their grasp loosening. For the first time, they felt weak. Martha felt power surge through her. The connection between her and Leo strengthened, unbreakable in the face of despair. Slowly, that warmth spread, illuminating the cold dark, and with it, a promise. They would fight this together. In that moment, something shifted. The whispers began to fade, their voices losing the sweetness that once had drawn Leo closer. Martha grasped Leo's hands tightly in hers, the familiar softness of his little fingers anchoring her. "You are my heart," she whispered fiercely, looking into her son's frightened eyes. "You are my light, and we will not be afraid." With newfound determination burning brightly in her chest, they turned from the darkened wall together, facing the flickering light of the lamp that seemed to brighten in acknowledgement of their courage. With every step backward, the shadows shrank, their whispers becoming faint echoes as Martha and Leo escaped the clutches of darkness. As they emerged, exhausted but together, Martha could feel the warmth of the sun spilling in through the windows, brighter than before, illuminating the corners of the room that had once felt so foreboding. Perhaps love truly was the strongest of all magic, the very essence of light that could drive back the shadows. With Leo safely at her side, she made her way to the front door, her heart still racing, a spectacle of emotions churning within. This was not the end of the struggle, it felt more like a beginning. But together, they could face anything that lurked in the shadows, for they were family, bound by love. And as Martha closed the door to the darkened room, sealing the shadows within, she felt a surge of hope. They had become warriors in their own right, ready to reclaim their home and keep the darkness at bay. The sun streamed into their lives, promising brighter days ahead. Together, they would navigate the cracks in the walls and fight back against the creeping darkness, with love lighting their path. The nights grew longer, and the shadows in the house whispered secrets that Martha couldn't understand. The walls seemed to pulse with an unseen life, a sinister energy that felt as though it was alive, writhing and shifting just beyond her reach. It was as if something dark and hungry lurked beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to surface. Martha could feel its presence. It sank deep into her bones, chilling her from the inside out. Since that terrifying night when Leo had vanished, swallowed by the very horrors that haunted their home, a heavy darkness wrapped around her heart. The only sign of her son was the echoing whispers that haunted her every waking moment, cruel reminders of her powerlessness. In the days and nights that followed Leo's disappearance, Martha locked herself away in her dimly lit bedroom. She felt as though she had suddenly become a ghost herself, drifting in the shadows. The walls around her seemed alive, bleeding darkness as if they were absorbing her sorrow. The shadows crept closer, inching toward her sanity, wrapping around her thoughts like the cold coils of some monstrous snake. As time slipped by, hours stretched into days, and she avoided looking in the mirrors, frightened of the reflection that might stare back at her. A scared woman with hollow eyes that mirrored the deep well of emptiness in her heart. With every passing moment, paranoia clung to her like a second skin. Martha would often glance around the room, convinced that something unseen was watching her from the dim corners, lurking in the darkness, waiting patiently for her to completely succumb to her despair. She could feel the weight of it pressing against her chest as if the shadows were trying to smother her with their presence. On the third night without Leo, desperation clawed at her heart. She knew she had to try something, anything, even if it meant facing the very darkness that had stolen her son. Drifting through the house like a specter, she draped a warm shawl around her shoulders for comfort and crept cautiously into the living room. The air felt thick and heavy, almost suffocating, laden with a miasma that made her stomach turn. Fear coursed through her veins, and her heart raced as she thought about possibly finding hints of Leo. Cautiously, she knelt before the crack, an ominous fissure in the wall that had consumed her child. She reached out with shaking fingers, hesitating for just a moment before daring to touch the rough surface of the wall. "Leo," she called out, her voice trembling and unsteady. "Can you hear me?" Her heart pounded, and in that moment, silence enveloped her, a deep and empty stillness that echoed her own profound solitude. Then, she heard it, the whispers returned, swirling around her like a chilling wind, taunting her. "He's ours now," they hissed, twisting around her heart and squeezing it tight. Martha sank to her knees, her mind racing, grappling with the torment that clawed at her spirit. Why must you take him?" she cried out, her voice barely above a whisper. A low, guttural laugh erupted from beyond the crack, a blasphemous sound that sent bone-deep chills racing across her spine. "You were warned, sweet Martha. This house has chosen you to serve." Terror filled her as she turned frantically, searching for a way out, but there was no escape. The walls closed in on her, shadows licking at her heels, beckoning her to join their dark dance. In a moment of desperation and fierce determination, she gripped a heavy iron candlestick that rested nearby, raising it as if to fend off the looming darkness that threatened to consume her. With all her strength, she struck the wall, where the crack gaped wide, screaming for Leo as she did. Each hit echoed loudly in the silent room like a thunderclap, reverberating through the air. For a brief instant, the shadows jerked back, and within that fleeting moment, she caught a glimpse of her son. He appeared small and frightened, his tiny figure entangled in the swirling shadows. "Mommy, help," he called to her, the sound piercing through the haze of darkness. Yet even as she strained to believe it was real, his voice twisted and echoed, filtered through the haunting chorus of the shadows. They writhed around him, keeping her from reaching him. She felt the shadows tugging at her, their jagged edges clawing at her spirit. "I will not abandon you, Leo. I promise," she howled, determination sparking within her as she struck the wall again, desperate to reach her child. But the shadows only laughed, their sinister giggles wrapping around her like a cold embrace. "You cannot fight fate, Martha. He is ours now. You will pay the price for your defiance." Each blow she delivered against the wall felt like a hammer pounding on her very soul, and the shadows recoiled at first, but soon resumed their sinister dance, swirling closer, growing hungry and restless. She struck again and again, feeling the raw energy that surrounded the crack shift and pulse with malevolence. Her heart raced in protest, yelling at her to stop, warning of the consequences that lurked in shadows. But she couldn't give in. She couldn't leave Leo to whatever fate awaited him. This monstrous force that taunted her was wrong, and she was determined to save her son, no matter the cost. With each strike, she felt hope slipping away like sand through her fingers. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of chaos enveloping her, drowning out her thoughts. "You can't protect what's already been claimed," they repeated, their laughter ringing in her ears, relentless and haunting. The weight of this unsettling truth crashed down on Martha, suffocating her like a heavy blanket. She had trapped herself within an endless cycle of despair, a fragile web that she spun from her own fears. There was no escape from this darkness, this monstrous presence that had consumed both her and her child. The shadows twisted and twirled around her, ensnaring her in a twisted dance that felt choreographed by malevolence itself. In a final surge of desperation, she hurled herself toward the crack, reaching into the darkness, determined to find her son, even if it meant embracing the shadows that had stolen him away. "I'm coming, Leo," she cried, her voice carrying a longing that rang out into the stillness. As she pushed against the wall with all her might, the crack widened, shadows stretching out like claws to welcome her back into their dark fold. Martha felt her heart racing as she closed her eyes, waiting for what would come next. All around her, the whispers grew louder, a chorus of dark angels singing in unsettling harmony. In her heart, she clung to the hope that she could rescue Leo from the clutches of the shadows, that she could bring him back from the edge of despair. Every instinct told her to stop, that this was a fight she could not win. But the love for her son surged within her, igniting a fire that burned bright against the encroaching darkness. As she poured all her strength into her determination, the shadows reached out, their cold fingers wrapping around her. She gritted her teeth and pushed forward, her spirit a blazing light against the engulfing dark. "I will not let you take him," she declared, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. In that moment, she felt a connection between them. Her love was an anchor, tethering them together across the infinite void that separated them. Driven by her emotionally charged electricity, Martha barreled forward, plunging deeper into the darkness. She felt weightless, like she was floating between this world and another, yet fear had no hold over her. She remained resolute, blinded by the hope that soon she would see her son's face once again. Suddenly, she found herself suspended in a swirling whirlpool of shadows. All around her were visions of her home, the laughter, the sweet sounds of Leo's voice calling her, "Mommy," the warmth of their shared moments. Yet, the darker forces here warped those images, twisting them into something grotesque, memories becoming nightmarish caricatures of their once happy life. Bigger and taller figures in the shadows laughed maniacally, and the cruel echoes of their laughter drilled through her. But Martha refused to let go of Leo. Fueled by love that burned brightly, she began to push back against the suffocating dark, forcing it away. She fought against each sinister laugh, against every whisper that told her she was lost. She screamed for her son, calling him back to her, calling out to the spirit of his laughter hidden within the shadowy depths. "Leo, I'm here, I'm coming for you," she screamed, her voice ringing through the darkness, determined and fierce. She pressed on, heart beating in time with her calls, feeling the connections that linked them as mother and son. With every ounce of strength she had left, Martha pushed through the shadows, fighting against their hold. So many memories flooded her mind. Leo's tiny hand wrapped tightly in hers, the joy in his laughter when he played, the way he would curl up on the couch beside her for story time. And suddenly, in the heart of the tumult, she felt a thread, a fragile connection like a beam of light that ran from her to her son. In that moment, the shadows shivered, their laughter faltering ever so slightly. It was as if the memories she summoned had punctured their dark facade. She could hear it now, a faint echo of laughter, sweet and hopeful, pulling her closer, guiding her through the labyrinth of darkness. Taking a deep breath, she summoned her courage one last time and charged ahead, extending her arms towards the glow of light she felt so strongly. "I'll always find you, Leo. You're my son, and I will never stop trying to bring you home." As her voice surged forward, the shadows buckled beneath the brightness of her love, their darkness parted like clouds before the sun. Hope and love consumed her, and she dove headfirst into the light, her heart racing with the promise of reunion. Clicking open a door she couldn't see, Martha prepared to step back into the world and gather her son back into her arms, ready for the challenge that lay ahead, arms outstretched and heart filled with love. The darkness twisted and howled behind her, but the spark of hope was stronger, and she would not let it dim. She would find her way back to Leo, no matter what. Martha found herself cloaked in a deep, infinite darkness. It wasn't just any darkness, it felt alive, swirling all around her, enveloping her like a heavy blanket made of shadows. As she stood there, she tried to scream, but her voice felt trapped in her throat. The echoes of her cries were swallowed by an overwhelming noise, whispers that seemed to come from every direction, twisting and turning in a wild dance. It was as though a storm of voices had been unleashed, swirling past her like an unstoppable tornado. Each whisper was laced with a strange, eerie power that made her heart race. "Martha," they called, their voices soft yet menacing. The shadows seemed to tug at her, pulling her down into the emptiness below her. It felt as if she might float away, weightless, like a feather caught in a whirlwind. All hope for escape seemed to drain from her like sand slipping through her fingers. Desperation filled her thoughts like an icy river, as memories of bright moments flooded her mind, twisting into dark visions. Laughter that had once filled her home changed into echoes of crying and anguish. Her heart sank. It was her home, but it had transformed before her eyes. Once warm and inviting, now the place felt foreign and frightening, a landscape of confusion and despair, where everything seemed to be crying for help. Amidst the swirling shadows, a realization struck her hard. She could feel it deep in her heart. The truth hit her that there was no way out of this place. All her struggles had only made the darkness surrounding her denser, pulling her in deeper and deeper. It had seeped into her very spirit, intertwining with the essence of who she was and turning her life into shadows. Martha felt herself being pulled further into that dismal void. The shadows danced around her like twisted vines, wrapping tighter and tighter, making her feel even smaller and weaker. The whispers morphed into a wild symphony, each note urging her to give in. "Let go, Martha, surrender to us. You belong here forever." Their tone was cruel, chilling her to her very core. The darkness seemed to smile, inviting her to give up and forget the light she once knew. In that moment, the images in her mind shifted. She could see Leo's face, his laughter like music she longed to hear. But as she reached for him, the shadows surged, changing shape to keep him at a distance. They twisted and churned, and she felt a wave of panic crash over her. "No, no," she cried out again and again, voice breaking above the chaos, only to be met with silence. She lunged toward the flickering light of her son, her little Leo, vibrant and full of joy. But each time she moved, the shadows pushed her back, stronger than she could have ever imagined. The voices hissed around her now, "Only one can escape. Your light cannot exist here." The realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. It was not just Leo she fought for, it was herself. She could almost feel the heavy chains of loneliness tighten around her heart, squeezing out hope. Martha could sense the endless sorrow in the air, the kind that twisted souls into those who forgot love and yearned only to be free of pain. The coldness of despair washed over her, its grip tightening, pulling her into an abyss where spirits lingered, spirits like her, who were caught forever between shadows and light. "Join us," they whispered with an unsettling mixed tone of pity and mockery. "Turn away from the light. You cannot save him. There is no solace out there." With all her might, Martha fought against the tide of longing, battling waves of crushing sorrow for the chance to hold her son again. But the shadows pulled at her, ever hungry, dragging her deeper into a dark sea of hopelessness, whispering sweet words of surrender. Just as she was about to give in, a thought struck her like a spark in the darkness. What if she fought not just for herself but for all those who had come before her, trapped like fish in a net? She could feel their presence, their fears wrapping around her, stories of moments lost, of dreams cast aside. She thought of her love for Leo, undying and fierce, a lamp trying to illuminate her path, fighting against this ravenous void. But with every brave thought, the shadows tightened their hold, squeezing until it hurt. A single tear escaped her eye, gliding down her cheek, an offering to the darkness. In those final moments, with all the love she felt for her son, she accepted what seemed inevitable. The darkness surged around her, consuming her being. As she sank deeper, the echoes of laughter turned to silence, and memories she cherished began to fade. The whispers, once simply tormenting, became a sinister lullaby, singing promises of acceptance into her ears. The loss of hope felt weighty, and just as she thought she might lose herself completely, she heard that soft, pure voice again. "Mommy, I'm here." Leo's cry pierced through the chaos, as if a finger of light had cut through the shadows. But it was more than a cry, it was a beacon of hope, a reminder of love that was so bright it could almost cut through the darkness. With every ounce of strength left in her, Martha fought against the shadows wrapping around her. But no matter how hard she tried, the darkness was relentless, pushing back against her will. With sorrow clinging to her heart, she felt the shadows overwhelming her once more. The whispers sang a vicious tune, and she realized, with a heart-wrenching shudder, that the shadows were alive. They thrived on her fear, her despair. "Give up, join us," they chanted, spinning words of deceit that wrapped around her thoughts like ropes. Martha's mind began to drift, her spirit shrinking, and with one final push against the looming despair, she surrendered, feeling her essence bending beneath the weight of sorrow. In that moment, as she let go, she could hear the dark laughter of the shadows echoing around her. "Welcome home, Martha," they gurgled. "You are finally one with us." The darkness felt thick like fog, wrapping around her as she melded with it. Memories blended with whispers until all that was left was a faint chime of laughter and the suffocating weight of despair. Time lost meaning in the eternal void. Martha became just another shadow, her light fading to nothing in the expanse of forgotten souls who danced in the gloom of eternal sadness. She became a part of it all, the dark, swirling mass that sang songs of despair, waiting, always waiting, for another unwitting soul to wander too close to the edges of their domain. Now, Martha was lost among the shadows, her spirit forever swirling in that endless void, reaching out for something she could no longer grasp. The darkness claimed her, and she could only listen to the whispers promising solace she would never find. She drifted through the shadows of her home, a place that had once been filled with laughter but was now only a prison of despair, where whispers filled the air, awaiting their next victim. And so, she waited, bound in darkness, as the shadows continued to delight in the pain of those souls who had also wandered too close into their eerie grasp, forever lost in the endless, eternal void.